Hello folks, Alex here. This is Alex Unabridged, and these are my 21st century trashy suggestions for Garb August. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, a bit of Garb August content for you today. That I do some recommendations for some trashy books and films that you might want to check out for Garb August this year, seeing as we're in 3 dimensions for Garb August 3. The third dimension being decades, to try and read as much trashy stuff from as many decades as you can. And as I was looking back over my previous reading from many years, I noted that quite actually the majority of the trashy books that I've read are from 21st century. I have read stuff from other eras, going all the way back to Victorian, but the bulk of my trashy stuff is definitely from this century. So I thought I'd pick some of my faves and give you some recommendations, some suggestions for things that you might want to check out, and where they might fit on the bingo board or in the weekly prompts, things like that, in case you're still casting around for some ideas for things to read or watch. So I will go through each of the 3 decades of the 21st century, well, 2.5 nearly, and give you a few books for each of different sorts. So some romance, some adventure, some pulpy crimes type stuff, some trashy horror novelizations, and then I will give you a couple of movies as well, a couple of my favourite trashy movies from that decade, to give you some potentials to watch if you haven't seen them already, or if you have and just fancy a rewatch. So let's get straight into it then with the first decade of the 21st century. So these are things from 2000 to 2009. So in terms of like romance stuff, I am going with Dead Until Dark, which is the first Sookie Stackhouse Southern Vampire Mystery book by Charlaine Harris. This is obviously the series that True Blood, the TV show, was based on. This is widely available secondhand or in libraries, stuff like that. Yeah, I really like this series. It is fun, it is fast-paced, it is full of sex and violence and sexy vampires and sexy vampire violence, as well as, you know, as you get into it, other kind of supernatural beings. But the first one is primarily vampires. So yeah, this would go on the bingo board then as sexy vamps. It could also potentially go on as long-running series, because I'm not sure where they got to. I stopped around about book 9, but I think it went into sort of book 11 or 12, something like that. So yes, could go on for the long-running series box on the bingo board. Okay, next up then we've got some kind of adventure mystery type stuff with the Da Vinci Code. This one is, I think, absolute, you know, kind of peak trash in terms of great, fast-paced, slightly ridiculous, you know, kind of mystery, thrillery type stuff from Dan Brown. Not always a fan of Dan Brown stuff at all, but the Da Vinci Code I really enjoyed. It was a great holiday read when I read it. It was a proper thing that you could sit on a train and like rip through on a journey. So yeah, I think it's a great fast-paced story. Again, a ton of copies out there, secondhand. I think it's on Kindle in the UK for 99p at the moment, but libraries will hold copies, I'm sure. This would cover you on the bingo board under, say, maybe cults and conspiracy theory, perhaps. Okay, the horror from this decade then is The Lock by Steve Alten. Steve Alten is the author of Meg, which is probably his better known series about the prehistoric monster sharks. But The Lock is no less ridiculous, really. It's just the Loch Ness Monster instead. This is included in the Audible Plus catalogue, the audiobook is, although be aware that there are some terrible Scottish accents in it. But it is cheap enough to find secondhand online as well. That's where I got my copy from, and it was only about £3, something like that. This obviously would go on the bingo board under killer animals. And possibly conspiracy, I guess, as well. Okay, and the novelisation from this first decade is Snakes on a Plane. A great novelisation of a great trashy, silly movie. You know, the title says it all, really. This can be found secondhand again online. This is by Krista Faust, who is an author that will show up again a couple of times in this list, because I think she's done some great fun stuff. So yes, this could go on bingo board under gangs or killer animals. And the movies I want to recommend, I'm trying to find movies that I think are kind of from the trashiest genres as well as the trashiest movies within those genres. And for me, movie genres like disaster movies can be quite trashy. So there's some horror, obviously, that's quite trashy. And then also adaptations, especially things like adaptations of video games or comic books, things like that, or of certain books. So the first movie I've got for you then is the disaster movie, and that is The Day After Tomorrow, from 2004. And yeah, it's definitely trashy. It's got some terrible CGI wolves in it. It is, you know, an ice age suddenly happens over the course of a few hours, and people try to outrun it, and that's not going to work. And it is the survival of a small group in the New York City Library, and the father of one of that group coming to try and find his son through this apocalyptic climate event. So yeah, I love it for some reason. I don't know why, because I know it's not a great movie. It's one of those that just, if it's on, I will watch it. Second movie, the horror movie, is Final Destination 3 from 2006. I really enjoyed the first 3 movies of this series. The third one, though, I find to be the most ridiculous and the most trashy, especially considering the DVD, when that came out, had a kind of interactive component to it where you could pick the events, you know, the course of events, in terms of, like, you know, what should a character do, and you'd get an alternative scene, an alternative death scene, that kind of thing. How would things play out differently? That was quite a gimmick. Not as much as 3D, but that was still quite a gimmick. But yeah, I really enjoy these. They're just silly, full of, you know, gory, silly deaths. And it is one of those where you're like, what are they going to think up next? So Final Destination 3. And then the third movie is Resident Evil from 2002. So this is one based on a video game. This has Mila Jovovich in it. Again, another fun, fast-paced, action-filled, cheesy, trashy film with some not so great visual effects, which just makes it all the more trashy for me. Okay then, into the second decade, 2010 to 2019. The romance I'm recommending is a book called Starting From Scratch, Housemates Volume 5. So this is the 5th book in a series set around a group of housemates and their various different romantic entanglements. And they're all gay or bisexual, and each book focuses on a different pairing. And I've picked the 5th one, Starting From Scratch, by Jane Northcote. This is on Kindle Unlimited. Certainly in the UK it is anyway. That's where I read it. And this is about the relationship between a cis gay guy and a trans gay guy. And yeah, there's some spice in it, although it's generally just quite sweet more than anything else. It's more about the characters negotiating this relationship that's you know, more difficult for one of them because he's just come back to university after transitioning. So he's negotiating that and trying to find, you know, trying to find his way through all the sort of, you know, dating relationship kind of weirdness that comes with an extra level of having to come out as trans. So yeah, it's quite a sweet book. It's quite a quick read. It's got some decent sort of sweet sex scenes in it. It's a decent little gay category romance. Next up, I've got a couple of kind of pulpy crime books for you. Again, these are 2 by Krista Faust. The first one has a wonderful title. Butch Fatale, Dyke Dick, Double D Double Cross. Butch, this is essentially a hard-boiled PI crime pastiche involving a plotline about the Armenian mob and a lot of smut. I hasten to add. It's kind of a love letter to kind of the sort of cheesy pulp novels, crime novels of sort of the 50s and 60s. It's hilarious, but it also manages to hit some, some serious notes and some poignant notes and stuff like that. It's just excellent fun from what I remember. The character of Butch Fatale is described as a fast-talking, skirt-chasing, two-fisted lesbian private investigator with an insatiable appetite for two things: women and trouble. From what I remember, the sex scenes in this are robust, shall we say. So yes, this could go on the bingo board as one you wouldn't read on the bus, perhaps. And depending on your definition, it could go in as kinky sex as well, from what I remember. And the other book by Christopher Faust, that is also crime, is Money Shot. If you fancy something with a bit more kind of gritty violence. This is also on Kindle Unlimited, and this follows Angel Dare, a former porn star who is asked to do one last movie but ends up left for dead in the trunk of a car. But she survives and sets out to try and find out who tried to take her out, even if she has to leave a trail of bodies in her wake. From what I remember of this one, and I read this after I read Butch Fatale because I liked Christopher Faust's writing. From what I remember, this was really quick-paced, quite suspenseful, pretty gritty, quite brutal, I think, the violence from what I remember, quite dark. Angel Dare, I remember being quite a badass protagonist. And then I remember there being quite a bit of, good humour in it as well. Like some of the porn star names are great, things like that. And just there being kind of a humour to lift it out of some of the darker stuff. This one could go on the bingo board under nudity on the front cover, and also vigilante. Right, so my horror pick for the 2010 to 2019 decade is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Again, widely available at libraries, secondhand, things like that. This one I think has a lot of trashy elements to it. Grady Hendrix stuff generally I think does. I'm not always a fan, I have to say, but this one I really did like. But you can tell that he is influenced by Paperbacks from Hell. He is of course the author of the non-fiction book Paperbacks from Hell, which looks at that kind of era of trashy horror from the 70s and 80s. And yeah, I think My Best Friend's Exorcism certainly plays with that and takes inspiration from those sort of books and has a modern take on stuff. So yes, My Best Friend Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. And then the novelisation for this decade is The Cabin in the Woods, which is the novelisation of a horror film by Joss Whedon. And it's another one which, I haven't seen the film, funnily enough. I do want to watch it now I've read the book. But I really enjoyed the book without having seen the film. It was, again, it's another one that plays with tropes, but it's quite clever with it. It always kept me guessing throughout. Lots of nice twists and turns. It's just bonkers, to be honest. It's funny. It's got quite a dry wit at times. And yeah, it's a really just interesting story, and I really enjoyed it. It was really good fun. So this one could go on the bingo board for, I think, cults, potentially. Certainly conspiracy theory. Okay, and the movies from this decade then. The disaster movie is going to have to be San Andreas from 2015. I love Dwayne Johnson movies. They are my trashy comfort movies, my guilty pleasures. And I think San Andreas, it's not quite my favourite. My favourite will come up in a minute. But yeah, I love it, So yeah, so this is obviously the San Andreas fault activating, is that the right word? and all of the chaos that ensues with earthquakes and fires and building collapses and all that kind of stuff. And it's your kind of usual thing of the father, Dwayne Johnson, trying to get to his kids or to his daughter to rescue her. Yeah, it's just silly fun. Again, really good silly fun with some ridiculous action sequences in it. The second movie then is a horror movie, and that is Crawl from 2019. This is about a girl who defies evacuation orders and returns home to Florida during a Category 5 hurricane to check on her dad, and then they get trapped in their house in the crawl space with some monster alligators, crocodiles, whichever the right species is for that area of the world. Again, great, silly fun killer animal movie. And then the third movie is my host recommendation movie, which is another Dwayne Johnson movie and probably my favourite, and that is Rampage from 2018, which is based on a video game. And it's by no means the best Dwayne Johnson movie, but it's probably the most ridiculous, and I think that's why I like it. There are sections in that still make me laugh with their ridiculousness when they happen. The first time I watched it, I was in tears with how ridiculous it was. So I love it for that. It is what it is. And I find it hilariously ridiculous. So that's my host recommendation if you want that one. Okay then, the final decade, or the final 4 years of this current decade we're in, 2020 to 2024. The romance, I've got a couple because I couldn't decide between them. Most of the romances that I've read have been from 2020 onwards. The first one is The Minotaur's Mate by Delaney Rain. That is a gay romance between a human being and a minotaur type being. It's kind of science fiction, fantasy, smut, basically. It's quite amusing. It's got a good sense of humour, actually. I really enjoyed it. It's quite sweet as well. It's smutty, but it's also sweet. It's quite a quick read, and I enjoyed the world building in it. And the other one that I have for you is Soul Eater, which is the first book in the Monstrous series by Lily Mayne, which is more gay spice, but this is gay male monster spice in a post-apocalyptic setting. This is set in America after a portal has ripped open and monsters from another dimension have poured through it and wreaked havoc. But there are some sentient monsters, some monsters that are good and are kind of seeking companionship, should we say. And yeah, I really like the world building. I really like the kind of, it's quite an adventure story. It's usually like a pair that have had to team up, a monster and a human man, and you know, they've got to go on a quest somewhere, you know, an adventure somewhere. They've got to get from A to B and deal with a load of attacks and stuff on the way. So there's a very adventurous side to it, but there's also a lot of smut, monster smut in it. That's part of the series. Soul Eater isn't, I don't think, the best in the series, but it's still a good start, and it made me want to read more. So either of those books, The Minotaur's Mate or Soul Eater, are on Kindle Unlimited. And these would go on the bingo board, definitely under kinky sex, probably under wouldn't read on a bus, certainly for The Minotaur's Mate. Could probably go under weirdly specific subgenre, especially like Soul Eater, which is gay male monster post-apocalyptic spicy romance. And that could also probably go into the long-running series, because I think we're up to book 7 or 8 on that, and I don't know whether there's more coming. But yeah, potentially that could go into the long-running series. Okay, the next one then is a kind of an adventure sort of book, and that is Wasteland Warlords #1. This is a lit RPG, a literary role-playing game. Not a game that you play, but a book that kind of uses conventions, mechanics, etc. from video games within the story. So in this case, it's a post-apocalyptic setting where a game world has bled into parts of the real world. There are zones in the United States where you know, beasts and such like come from, you know, come from the games, inhabit the world, take over and cause trouble. And our group of characters go into one of these zones to try and find loot and get, you know, kind of special powers and all that kind of stuff. And it, you know, it does use things like character stats and stuff like that as part of the conventions, as part of the storyline. But it's very well done. It's not at all dry in that. It's not at all confusing. It's very funny. It's very random. You've got like mecha raccoons with laser eyes in it. It's random. It's really random. The characters are fun. There is a decent amount of kind of emotional depth to them and to their relationships, but it's just bonkers fun, to be honest. It's, as I say, it's on Audible Plus catalogue. That's where I got it. It was well narrated. I think it was narrated by Travis Baldry, actually, the author of Legends and Latte, so it's well narrated. Or you can get it on Kindle for about 99p, I think. And this one could go in the weirdly specific subgenre, I think. You know, lit RPGs are probably weirdly specific enough. Okay, the horror for this decade then is Methalodon by Hugo Navikov. This is on Kindle Unlimited, and this is exactly what you'd expect. It is about a megalodon prehistoric shark monster that swallows a submarine used by a drugs baron for smuggling a lot of meth and other drugs. It swallows that, and the meth seeps into its system, and it goes on a rampage. And the meth also gets into the rest of the ocean, and lots of other sea creatures go on rampages as well. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's great fun. And I really enjoyed it. It's quite a short book. It's kind of a novella length. But yeah, absolutely great fun if you like sort of silly sharky type stuff. This could go on the bingo board under drugs, gangs, or killer animals. There is also my host recommendation as well, comes from this decade, and that is Psychic Teenage Bloodbath by Carl John Lee. This is Kindle Unlimited as well. This is kind of quite inspired by, I think, sort of Carrie, things like that. It's a queer story about a couple of girls who, at the beginning of the book, they're getting bullied, and one of them gets horrendously injured in an attack from the bullies. And she ends up in hospital, unable to move, completely paralysed, but she is awake and essentially trapped in her body. And over the next year, she goes quite mad, and also discovers that she has psychic abilities, and so uses those in the most horrible ways to get back at the bullies. Yeah, it's extreme horror. It's definitely extreme. There's some pretty disgusting, gory sort of horror sequences, body horror in it. But it's more than that. It's got, again, it's got some emotional depth to it. It's got some great sort of queer representation in it. It's about friendship. It's about relationships. It's got some more. It's more to it, and it's very humorous as well. So yeah, that's one that's my host recommendation. So that's on Kindle Unlimited. That could go on the bingo board under Killer Kids, or host recommendation, obviously. And then my final pick for the novelization for this decade is a bit of a random one, and that is Animal Crossing New Horizons Volume 1, Deserted Island Diary. This is manga, and this is based on the video game Animal Crossing's New Horizons, a game that I absolutely adore. Yeah, so this one is, if you're an Animal Crossing fan, you will get something out of this. It's highly amusing. It's a very entertaining little story. And the manga works really well for it. You can find it secondhand, quite cheap these days. And this would go on the bingo board under Trash in Translation, because it's translated from Japanese, or based on a video game. Okay, so that's all the books I've got to recommend then. And the final 3 movies from 2020 to 2024 are... the disaster movie is Greenland from 2020. I couldn't have some trashy movies on here without Gerard Butler appearing at some point. Another one that I quite like Dwayne Johnson. Dwayne Johnson's the king for me. That's undisputed for me. But Gerard Butler usually entertains as well, and Greenland I did particularly enjoy. So yeah, this follows a family kind of trying to find somewhere safe to go, fighting for survival, because a world-ending comet is on its way and is about to crash into Earth, and it is just, you know, ridiculous. Again, it's silly. There's some decent action, decent special effects, and some decent character work in it as well. Some decent sort of emotional moments in it, but it is trashy as hell as well, and I really enjoyed that. The horror movie that I've got for you is one that I'm kind of, I think it only just edges into the trashy for me, and I think it's actually a brilliant movie, and that's Megan from 2022. This is, you know, AI gone rogue in a doll, essentially a life-sized doll that's meant to be somebody's best friend. So it's got the creepy doll factor for sure. There's some great like creepy movement in it, and it's goofy. I think that's what makes it feel kind of trashy in some respects. It's a comedy horror, you know, it's a comedy horror definitely. But I mean, I think it's a reasonably low budget film, but what they've done with it in terms of effects and like the makeup and the way that they do Megan is really good. I really liked it, and there is a second one coming out. I think it's called Megan 2.0 or something. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. But I think it just edges into, it feels trashy to me. It feels trashy enough, but it's great in its trashiness. It's one of my favourite movies that I saw last year. And then the third movie is Justice League from 2021, the Snyder cut, not the Joss Whedon version. I'm not usually a Zack Snyder fan at all, but I actually really enjoyed this. And I've picked this because, you know, it's a comic book movie. It's Warner Brothers comic book movies, which are like cash grabby, definitely. And it's particularly so because this was released because a lot of fans said we want to see the Zack Snyder version that was kind of cancelled. So they released it, obviously, again, they knew they were going to make a load of money from it. And it had gimmicky things like they also released it in black and white, the artsy version. And yeah, I find that quite trashy as well, because it's a superhero movie at the end of the day. And they can be great and they can be, you know, serious movies, but there's still a trash element to them. They're an adaptation of some other form of media, and certainly when you're getting into franchises like that, it's, you know, it's about making money. There's a trashiness there in that. But yeah, I quite like Justice League. Just be aware on that one if you haven't seen it. It's long. But it's got some great action in it, and it's slightly overly earnest at times as well, which I find is a little bit trashy. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I've seen it a few times, and it's one that I would watch again. So there you go, folks. Those are my recommendations for some 21st century trashy novels and movies. Hopefully these might have given you some ideas. I had great fun watching or reading all of this stuff. So I hope if you pick anything off this list, you have fun with it too. So yes, thank you very much for watching, folks. As always, do drop your thoughts in the comments below. It's always lovely to hear from folks. I will be back with more GARBAUGUST content next Wednesday. That will be my big pile of possibilities that I will be putting out then. So if you're still scouting around for things, then you might find some ideas in that as well. I'm trying to do everything this year using only books that I can get within my subscriptions, so Audible Plus and Kindle Unlimited, and anything that I find for free, like on Project Gutenberg or the Internet Archive, places like that. So yes, so do tune in for that if you fancy seeing what I might be reading for GARBAUGUST, or if you want some more ideas. So I do hope you will join me for that then. But from me, for now, stay trashy.